17, Regional Wastewater Reclamation. Staff report, quickly. I have one speaker. Do you want to hear the speaker first or the staff report? And staff report.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'll start, and obviously we have Tom Burke here, as well as the staff at Wastewater. This is really a request for rate adjustments based on the financial plan that's been proffered and moved through the Wastewater Advisory Committee. You have their letter of recommendation. What it essentially, in summary, does is ask for 4% rate increases over the next 3 consecutive years. This is...
I'm going to interrupt you just quickly. In your explanation, I think some of us on the board thought that we were done with this with the adoption of ROMP. And so if you could, as you proceed with the explanation, tell us why, how, if it is correct, this is different than ROMP.
Yes, Madam Chair. This is really the tail end of ROMP, and as you know, ROMP had 10% consecutive rate increases over the last few years. And these rate increases are more in line with the typical increased operating cost associated with operating utility, as well as continuing the capital program to replace and to modify many of the Interceptor sewers. When you look at ROMP, we have concluded that very large capital expenditure of nearly $600 million plus, and we're now in the process of repaying that debt over a limited period of time, and therefore that's typically a fairly large component of the past increases. If you then look at what we've done with regard to flow volumes and the rates and revenues that are due to utility, what we're looking at is now trying to maintain the operating and maintenance expenses and try and hold them to a 4% increase. Sometimes these costs are beyond the control of the utility, particularly electric costs and other things that they're incurring. One of the things that I think, if you looked at the financial plan and went through the charts and graphs, you notice that over just the past few years, there's been about an 8% decrease in flow volumes. And 8% decrease in flow volumes is attributable to new construction being significantly more conservation flow related as opposed to past construction. In addition, the fact that residential growth is only about 1 to 1.5% of the base, and you look at an 8% reduction in flow volume and assume that 70% of our revenue comes from the volumetric charge. So you can see that there's probably been simply, in this particular case, since the last time we had a rate increase, and we did not have a rate increase the previous year, so now it's the second year. And that represents 4% alone in revenues, absent any increase in cost. If you then, I think there were some questions raised about average rates and again, the issue associated with City of Phoenix. We're still trying to confirm the City of Phoenix average cost is $20 a month, but we also were able to actually determine that there are significant operating differences between Phoenix and Pima County. The one is that their facilities treat 300 million gallons a day of sewage, and ours treat 60 million gallons, plus we operate 8 separate facilities, and they only operate 2. Many of our smaller facilities that we operate on our periphery have much higher operating costs than our regional facilities at Ina and the new facilities. Their growth in connection fees and population has been greater than ours. Their effluent, they actually retain ownership of their effluent as opposed to our effluent goes to the city of Tucson. They sell their effluent to the Palo Verde nuclear plant, and it's a revenue source for the wastewater utility. In our case, we have no revenue from that source. It goes to the city of Tucson. The city of Tucson operates the water utility, we operate the sewer utility, and Phoenix are operated as a joint utility, so they share overhead cost. So that reduces some of their cost. One of the interesting components is who you compare yourself to. If we compared ourselves with San Diego, the average monthly cost in San Diego is now $95. In Atlanta, it's $110. And so everything's relative. If you look at the average across the nation, it was $36 a month in 2013. By the time you add the average increases over time, it increases, the average national cost increases to about $43 a month. If you look at then our increases, ours would be about 42, so we'd be about the average in the nation. So I think the point is that this is different than ROMP. We're through the ROMP capital expenses, but we have to pay the debt. We also need to continue a modest capital program, and that's, and when you see modest, you see it. If you look at the financial plans, ramping down from $45 million a year and dropping, and all of that's going into Interceptor sewer rehabilitation to avoid catastrophic collapses that tend to occur, could occur, and the collapse that we experienced on West Speedway, cost us probably $20 to $25 million. We need to ensure that we continue to avoid that. We have other cost increases that figure into the operating and maintenance expenses of the utility. If we do not have 4% rate increases, or there's no rate increase, what we will have to do is go back and cut about $6.5 million out of the operating budget of the wastewater utility. So that's a few of our answers, and obviously we can provide more detailed information to every specific questions.
Mr.
Madam
Huckleberry?
Chair. I think you were first, Supervisor Elias, then Supervisor Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Huckleberry, how many miles of Interceptor repairs are taxpayers going to realize? And where are those repairs going to be made?
Yes, Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias, let me let Jackson Jenkins, our wastewater director, answer that question.
Mr. Jenkins?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias, we have 3,500 miles of conveyance pipeline infrastructure, and about 10% of that is our main interceptors. So about 350 miles of interceptors. The two biggest projects we're undertaking this fiscal year is the North and South Rito Interceptor Repairs. Collectively, they're about 15 miles of repairs, and they're going to cost about $35 million for that rehabilitation. So that gives you an order of magnitude, but obviously we have our infrastructures in various stages of age and degradation.
How old are those lines, Mr.?
John, can you help me with that one? How old are those?
And identify yourself for the record, please.
Excuse me, John Warner, Deputy Director for Wastewater Conveyance Division.
You need to speak up just a little bit.
Sorry. The age of most of our interceptors are going to go back from the late 50s into this, spattered out throughout the 60s.
No, the ones that we're going to repair, I'm interested in.
Okay, the ones that we're repairing right now, the North Rito, South Rito systems are 60s vintage, around the 65 vintage era.
So we have other interceptors that are older.
Yes, we have, they're scattered throughout our system serving the community. These are a couple of the oldest ones. The oldest system we have is down in town, and it's the 30-inch interceptors and run along the old railroad track on the side of I-10.
So they're in District 5?
Excuse me?
They're in District 5,
Okay.
the oldest lines that you're not repairing.
No, those were addressed years ago. We have a new system, portions of it that's been put in a couple of years ago, the Santa Cruz Interceptor system.
I understand that,
It's
I
offloaded
understand
those
that,
quite a
but we
bit.
have another interceptor line that's older, right?
Yes,
That's still in use.
yes.
Okay, good enough. You know, it seems to me that at the same time all of this has been going on, and we've been getting these rosy financial stories from wastewater, your overhead has gone up a lot. $3.5 million in the last 3 years. What's that all about, Mr. Jenkins?
Are you talking, Supervisor Elias, is that county overhead or?
Yes, sir.
If I could, I'll defer to Mr. Burke on the county overhead.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Burke?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Elias, the overhead component went up significantly because prior to last year, the staff time for financial support and IT support and HR support were placed into the personnel services units of the budget. Starting last year, we moved those into the county overhead and charged the department through an overhead to show that the compensation being paid by the department to those people that report directly to the director are reported just as compensation. So you should see a drop in overall compensation. It's just a shift from one area to the other, and it causes
Yeah, you're
overhead
just
to go
shifting
up.
money around. It's not really increased costs, right?
Overall,
But it is significant because the wastewater division is a enterprise fund. And they have to pay for their own way as they go along. So we dump some costs over there, and now we have to, you know, deal with these increases as well as other reasons. I recognize that. But other professional costs gone up 7.6 million over the last 3 years? Is that another one for Mr. Burke, or is that for
Madam Chair.
which of the cast of characters?
Mr. Burke?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Elias, the primary increase in that was the privatization of what used to be we closed the Roger Road Treatment Facility and built the Agua Nueva facility, and that's privately operated.
I thought that was gonna save us money.
So it shifts the money, once again, the money shifts from other expenditures such as our costs for chemicals and our costs for labor, and shifts it into outside services costs because we're not paying a private entity to
Right,
manage.
so it's kind of the Ali shuffle. Got it. Okay. Electricity bill went up more than 3.5 million since we stopped operating the energy plant that we had there at Roger Road, which was a good deal for everybody, I always thought, but that's another significant cost that's gone up. And were we supposed to get some grandiose deal from TEP that fell through in the midst of all of this as well? Who's gonna answer that one?
I'll
Mr.
take that.
Jenkins, please?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Elias, when we talk about electricity, we need to talk about energy because it's a combined cost.
Thank you.
When we ran the power plant, it had labor costs associated with staff that operated the facility. We had to purchase natural gas we used a biogas and natural gas to run that facility. And then we also bought commercial electricity as well. Collectively, the energy cost now is almost identical to the energy cost previously. Yes, we did qualify because we used more electricity. We qualified for lower rates from TEP that were cheaper than we previously paid. And they have increased the rates. Just 2 years ago, TEP increased the rates 13%. So we lost some of that benefit. But even with those rate increases, we're still at the same energy cost. And actually, on a unit basis, our energy cost per customer is lower than it has been ever.
Well, we're using more electricity,
Yes, sir.
which is in opposition of the resolution that we passed about sustainability. What was that, Chuck, 6 years ago? Okay, all right. I just get concerned because I got all these users in District 5 that I represent that live in the oldest neighborhoods of all of Tucson and have been paying their sewer fees longer than anybody else, subsidizing growth that's taken place all over this county, especially in the Northwest and out throughout the county. And I just see that our users are getting banged on again to pay these increases. And You know, I don't want to do damage to the organization or to wastewater, but I think it's good for all of us to understand that a lot of the decisions that we've made have helped cause some of these things. And also monkeying around with shifting costs from one department to another rather than really reducing those costs. Just strikes me as being somewhat, I don't know, I wouldn't say untruthful, but it's a function of how government has changed recently. And the other thing is that financial predictions that we received were not what we're hearing today. I just want my residents to know that there's been a story that's changed here. Because if we're gonna clobber them again, and I understand that, then they at least ought to know that we changed horses in midstream. I mean, that somehow Dr. Seuss isn't telling the same story anymore. Thank you.
Mr. Huckleberry?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think, you know, one of the important points to discuss is the issue of, yes, the overhead has been consolidated because it's being reported accurately as opposed to split out within the departmental
And
budgets.
it's a better, frankly, from an accounting standpoint, it's more accurate and it's more transparent.
It's more accurate and it's significantly lower than other enterprise utilities of our comparator region, such as Tucson Water. And so I think that when we look at, you know, these rate increases, it's pretty simple. We're actually, you know, trying to continue the rehabilitation that we started and ensure that we don't have any catastrophic losses associated with collapsing sewers or our first, we'll say, fidelity is actually to permit compliance. Because if we don't do that, we face some very serious issues regarding public health, fines, and ultimately the control of our wastewater utility. I think the other thing to point out is that, you know, these are not unusual rate increases for public utilities. I think we've heard about
But that wasn't part of the predictions that we heard, Mr. Huckleberry. So while it's not unusual, it's a different story.
In the story with regard to energy, and I think it's been adequately explained, but the issue is those rate utilities and those rate structures are controlled by the Corporation Commission, and we operate on what we operate, even though, even with those rate increases, we're still better off providing the energy profile that we do today as opposed to running a combined system.
Well, we are using more electricity and adding to our own problems with the amount of electricity that we use from power plants ultimately that are really bad in terms of climate change for us all.
Yes, Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias. Yes, we buy power from coal-planted facilities, but at the same time we have, you know, 1 and 2 and 3 megawatt solar facilities located at our utilities. So, you know, we're doing what we can as in all in compliance with our sustainability ordinance to do those things. But if you look at the water utility across the street, they're talking about, you know, 5 consecutive years of 8% increases. And so we're seeing that happen.
With no infrastructure.
No infrastructure, and I think when you look at the Phoenix model, and it's a little different in the order of magnitude we talked about, but I think when you look at that Phoenix model, you also know that their major investments that they made in their systems were 20 years ago, where that asset and that capital has been paid off. We're in the beginning of paying off ours. Now our rates, you know, we will see probably those dramatic drops. There's a chart in the financial forecast that talks about our debt service payments, and they drop off rather rapidly, and we don't experience that. So what we've effectively done is build a system for 50 years and paying it off in about the first 12. And so our ratepayers will see the same kind of benefits that probably Phoenix folks are seeing. But all this infrastructure investment goes in cycles. We know that probably Phoenix is going to have to reinvest. And so ultimately, you know, we're at the beginning of our reinvestment, whereas they're toward the end of it.
May I, just to follow up to Supervisor Elias in terms of what this, moving forward, this next fiscal year, what we're doing in terms of the Interceptor, how we make that north-south Rito, how do you prioritize, or how does wastewater prioritize which interceptors to move forward with?
Chair Bronson, we have a very formalized system on review of our conveyance infrastructure. We have a regular program of closed-circuit television, CCTV, where we inspect all of our sewer lines on a 10-year continual cycle. And based on a NASCO, a formal process.
What's NASCO?
John, help me on the acronym there.
I love acronyms, but I'd like to know what they mean.
Yes, National Association.
Turn on your mic.
Sorry. It's a National Association of
Something.
Sanitary Sewer Assessment, but it's a national standard with all the utilities. And right now with the acronym exactly, I can't even call it up. I apologize for that.
Sorry.
But that system, we rate on a scale from 1 to 5, and a 5 is an imminent danger of failure, and we've pretty much taken care of all those. So we focus on the 3s and especially the 4s. And through this continual mapping, we lay out our capital improvement program of which system is going to get the work. And every year as we're doing our planning, if we get new higher rated degradation, it can take the place of a lesser rating, and it's kind of a moving dynamic system, but we have it laid out for the next 2 years quite clearly of what systems will be touched.
But I mean, the point here is that you're doing it on a basis of need and its nearness to catastrophic failure.
That's correct.
Okay. And then why did we need, we invested, I doubt that the city of Phoenix invested $600+ million in capital improvements. Why did we do that? That's a big number.
Yeah, Chair Bronson, the $600 million primarily targeted the ROMP improvement, the Regional Optimization Master Plan, was major investment in our treatment infrastructure.
Why did we do that?
The regulatory criteria from the Environmental Protection Agency through their regulatory arm, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, required us to remove the nutrients from our 2 largest wastewater treatment plants, that the technology we previously used did not do that. So that was the requirement of the upgrades.
And what if we had chosen not to do that?
If we had not, we would have more than likely been under a consent decree from the regulatory agencies. Mr. Huckleberry quoted the Atlanta cost of almost $110 a month. They were under consent decree, and they have a $4 billion project for upgrades because of their system, both sewer and combined sewers for stormwater. And we could have very well been in that same boat of many or much more added cost, having outside involvement in determining what was best for us to do.
Thank you. Supervisor Miller, you had questions?
Yes, I did. The thing that jumps out, I agree with Supervisor Elias. My expectations would be things would be more efficient, and they've turned out not to be more efficient. And you can talk about the correction of some accounting issues and making the accounting more accurate. That tells me that we were misleading right from the beginning. And now we're moving more costs in that we didn't previously see, as Supervisor Elias pointed out. The other thing I'd like to point out is in April 2014, we spent close to $700 million on wastewater improvements. That includes $60 million in certificates of participation approved in December 2014, which have added significantly, along with the $4 million for a new laboratory addition that we didn't necessarily need at this time because we're going to be leasing it out to the University of Arizona. It's these kinds of things that we've done with these monies that have added to the cost, added to operations and maintenance costs. And what we're going to see is continued operations and maintenance costs. Right now, you have the University of Arizona paying them, but we're paying for the capital improvements of building that building. U of A is paying some lighting and the electric bills and some other things, maintenance, janitorial type services. but we're paying for that building. And eventually those costs are gonna be on to Pima County if and when we ever decide to use that building. So these things, I voted no on because I could see it coming, another rate increase. And how much have the rates increased since the beginning of this project? It's been a huge percentage increase. Do you know?
Since this project, I go back to 2004 when I joined the county, the average rate was around $13 a month, the lowest in the nation. We're now close to $40 a month, so a 300% increase in the past 10 plus years.
Right.
Somewhere in that time is when they made significant increases to cover the capital debt service that we talk about in ROMP. I don't have that exact number, maybe Mr. Burke could help with that one, but we have increased quite significantly. We've gone from the lowest rate payers in the country with our previous rates to now, we can ultimately treat to the quality of water of drinking water if we want to, but everything comes with a cost. And to this higher environmental standard, it came an increased cost. And that's kind of what we're stuck with that regulation.
Well, I do understand that, but we didn't need to build building, and some of the improvements out there weren't necessary. We needed to focus on the pipes and the intercepts as you're now doing, finishing this project up. So those are two things I would like to point out on top of the things that Supervisor Elias talked about. And you talk about Atlanta, that's a far larger population than we have here in Pima County. And obviously we did not want to let the EPA come in and take over our wastewater, but I think we went above and beyond where we needed to go with these campuses. And are we set for the next 50 years? I would hope so, but end of the day, Mr. Huckleberry just pointed out, the Tucson water's been increasing rates 8% per year for the last several years. Everyone keeps piling onto the taxpayers, and this is 4% per year is what you're proposing. And how much longer can people absorb these costs? And I'm talking about people on fixed incomes, I'm talking about people on low incomes. And if we continue down this road, property taxes, we're already talking about more property taxes. We're talking about increasing costs, and we haven't anticipated what is coming down the road. People are going to be blindsided by this. And it may seem like a little bit to you and me, but to some people out there, it's the difference between eating and not eating. And it's getting more and more, everyone keeps piling on at 4% here, 8% there. You keep adding it up, it turns into a huge number. Those are the points I'd like to make on this. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
So, I was Supervisor, go ahead, Supervisor Valadez had asked.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead, go. With the point?
To her point.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead with the point. I was just gonna say, criticisms that I made of this increase set aside, no one understands the costs of a catastrophic failure of our sewer lines better than District 5 and better than this supervisor. Because in fact, that happened in my first year in office. And the damage and the collateral damage that was done to the residents of Barrio Hollywood was serious and palpable. And John, you were there at all those meetings that week as we tried to deal with actually having to move people out of their homes for several weeks while repairs went on. That was not easy. Aside from the $25 million that it cost us and the fines that we received from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. So I understand all of that, and I understand that we have to have a system that runs well. But, I think there's good questions about privatization and what it's done to us. I don't think it's been good in the long run, or in this so far into it. It's not really to the long run, and I understand that that's what you're claiming, Mr. Huckleberry. And the changes that we've made to accounting and human resources probably give us a more accurate view of things. But that's hard for our ratepayers to understand. That's not easy, and that's what I'm saying. We had one public hearing, and I don't know how many people showed up. Anybody over there know?
Supervisor Elias, at our first public meeting, we had 3 members of the public, and at our most recent second follow-up meeting, we had 2 members of the public.
Right, so somehow we have to do a better job of getting that word out there. It's important to have those public hearings, but We also have to have sound mechanisms for getting the word out so that people do understand what we're doing. I'm sorry, thank you for indulging me in those moments, Supervisor Valdez and Chair Bronson.
Mr. Huckleberry had wanted to respond to the campuses. Did you want to respond now or wait for Supervisor Valdez's question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Huckleberry. I remember sitting here when we had talked about funding ROMP and how the alternatives were frankly as bad as the rate increase caused by the ROMP plan were even more heinous. And I think we made the right choice at that time, and that dealt really with not the interceptors, but rather the treatment facility and what we were required to do by the federal government. So let's make it very, very clear, and I think it needs to be clear. ROMP was about the treatment facility and a requirement that was being placed on us by the federal government, and the option was we would have to do it anyway, and on top of that have a federal fee if we didn't do it as a penalty. But I think what we also need to consider is, and Christopher and I had a conversation before the meeting, and I find myself quoting Christopher a great deal. But the truth is that prior to ROMP, we as a county, Mr. Huckleberry, what kind of investment did we make in preventative care of the interceptor system?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valdez, I think it was sporadic. We had a couple of big projects that we pushed. Santa Cruz Interceptor was one because of the eventual quote at the time, the clamor that downtown would develop and we needed to have the capacity. So I think in the Santa Cruz Interceptor, we probably put in $60 million. And then there's been a few others, obviously, the repair of the collapse. And there's some debate about what caused the collapse, but that's here and there, it's behind us. And I think, the other point, and we can pull this information up because it's fairly easy to find, is the historic rate increases from year to year, and that prior to ROMP, they were relatively non-existent. They tended to be much more, we'll say, favorable to the user and higher to the new connector. And we can give you 20 years of that history that shows you prior to ROMP they were very low, and at ROMP when we began to undertake this process we indicated, we predicted, and this board approved 10% annual rate increases, which was significant, a very significant act as compared to what we've previously done.
Right, and I'd be very interested in seeing that in a memo form, Mr. Huckleberry, but tied into what kind of preventative maintenance was being done. I think what we failed to see pre-ROMP is that the investment that we made in terms of that kind of infrastructure was nil. So we didn't need to do any increases because frankly we weren't doing much. I remember that one of my first state of the counties dealt with public infrastructure, and that was a point that I made because we weren't spending, and that was what, 2005, 2006. So we've had a shift in philosophy, unfortunately because of a traumatic event that happened in District 5, but a realization that we either invest or we're going, the cost of doing maintenance during an emergency situation is just ridiculously high. Let me ask this, and I'm not sure, Mr. Huckleberry, if you're the correct person to ask or Mr. Jenkins. My question is, you're coming before this board and asking for an increase over the next 3 years of 4% annually. What has happened in the department in terms of cost cutting? Because obviously, if we're your first option, the first option needs to be, what have you cut in your budget that makes this more palatable to our constituents and our ratepayers?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valdez, let Jackson answer that question.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Valdez, there's a number of things, and I'm sure I won't remember all of them at this particular moment, but when we talk about the energy costs, maintaining our energy costs at this relatively flat level is incredible in the environment of increasing electrical rates. I think that's been a very diligent cost savings effort. It takes a lot of staff time and effort to review what tariffs we should be on. It's not like you go shopping and you pick, hey, I want this rate per kilowatt hour or that rate per kilowatt hour. It's a very detailed evaluation of numerous components of your electric bill that determine what's the optimum amount. And now that we have, as Mr. Sherlock talked about, this SCADA system and all these 40,000 input and outputs, we can see real-time data that help contribute in the calculation of determining the best tariff to be on for electric rates, and thus keeping our energy costs as low as possible. It's a big focus of ours. So we continue. I think we've saved a lot of money in the energy environment, and we will continue to do so with the tools that we now have. We've reduced staffing, even if you include the contract services of the firm that operates the new Agua Nueva facility. They have a staff of 17. Over the past 5 years, we've reduced our staffing by 42 people, not counting those 17. You could say it's a net 23 or 24 people that we've reduced. We have more to do than ever, but we're being more efficient. We've added a lot more process control and automation. Labor and benefits, wages and benefits are our highest single cost, so focusing on trying to be as efficient with the staffing level is very important, and I think we've done quite well in that arena. We've shut down Randolph Park facility, one of our smaller facilities that was quite expensive. That's saved us quite a bit of money. Here's one, I'm hoping I didn't have to get into this, it's a little bit technical for me to even explain, but in the ROMP we made a conscious decision not to add aqueous ammonia, a chemical additive needed in our disinfection process. It saved us quite a bit of capital money. The designer said we would need it in order not to make a disinfection byproduct that is on our permit list to not produce. We thought we were going to be smarter than the designer and how we added chlorine to disinfect our effluent. Well, in the long and short of it, they were right. We were making the trihalomethane byproduct, and so rather than go back and now put in that aqueous ammonia system, staff came up with the idea that the regulatory mandate is for us to remove ammonia. So if we're removing ammonia, why would we go buy ammonia to add to the process? So we found one of our waste streams. We take a small amount of our waste stream that we clean, and we use that ammonia that comes into the system to add to our chlorine process. And we've saved ourselves millions of dollars by implementing that in-house with in-house ideas and our own staff to put in the piping and plumbing system, and I think that's a phenomenal story to tell. If I could tell it without all the technical details with it, it would be a wonderful story to tell, but it saved us quite a bit of money, and we're continuing to look at those type of opportunities in everything that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Agobert, I'd like to make sure that in the memo where you're talking about our history, we also indicate the cost-cutting measures that you talked about and get a more complete list as well.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I think of all the issues that have been brought up by the board, we're going to respond to, we need to get you the factual information on all those issues that each member's brought up.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Let me just follow up on
Okay.
yours because it relates to cost. So these are cost savings you've actually incurred, or these are cost savings that are real now at this point in time. The department also provides services that are non-mandated. I guess in that memo that Supervisor Valadez has asked you to develop, if you could indicate the non-mandated services and the cost of the non-mandated services, and that may be another way to reduce the increases, but I know you have non-mandated services, and so I'd like to see that in the mix. Supervisor Valadez.
Madam Chair, another point that I want to address, and again, I'm not really sure who the appropriate person, so Madam Chair, I will address it through the chair. My question then deals with low-income rate payers. Obviously, we're talking about a multi-year, whatever the percentage is going to be, increase. What are we doing to try and help those that may be on a fixed income and getting close to their ceiling that we're talking about? What are we proposing to do? What are we doing? How are you going to address that issue?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Valadez, that was actually a conversation we recently had with our wastewater advisory committee, how we can improve upon that subsidy program. We just now have gathered a lot of information. We have approximately 7,000 customers that take advantage of that subsidy program. We do not bill about $1.1 million every year because of that subsidy program. Now that we have that data in front of us, I think the program is pretty robust and helpful, but I think getting the word out and making sure that everybody is aware of that program in my mind is something that could help enhance the utilization and saving the money for those that need it the most.
Madam Chair, Mr. Huckleberry, I'm a little uncomfortable with the percentage of the increase that's being proposed here. I'll be real honest. Madam Chair, Mr. Huckleberry, I guess I'd like to hear from you or Mr. Jenkins, what could be done if we don't do the full amount? Say we do just by throwing it out, the 2 years at 3% increase with a review after the first 2 years.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valadez, obviously the staff will try to make work what they direct, and what that could be, fine. And what we would have to do is come back and find probably about $1 million in cost cutting, at least in the operating side of the budget, maybe a little more, but that's something obviously we can come back. The ordinance and the rate increases, and while we're suggesting doing multiple to keep the board from coming back, you can do them a year at a time. You can put any cancellation on them. You can change your mind basically about 30 days notice. So I think what we're suggesting is that if you we've recommended what we believe through this process. But if you want to have an alternative, then what we would do is take the alternative and see how it works and come back to the board if there's any issues or discussions or problems. But I think we also need to come back and tell you all the things that each one of you raised too with regard to the status of the utility and what's occurred.
Thank you.
Well, so, Mr. Huckleberry, if I understand, you're saying we could continue this item and then hear back from you about what terms Mr. Valadez just quoted to you might do to us?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias, yes.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Because I want to support this, I really do, because I understand the needs and I don't want to go through the same thing that we've gone through before. But with that said, Supervisor Valadez's question about a program for low-income assistance, that's the same baloney that we've heard before from the department. Our program is robust, it works well, and it really doesn't. And it really doesn't. So I'd like to see some numbers on that, and I'd like to see...
Supervisor Elias, if that doesn't work well, you need to tell them why.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I want to know why, and we need to go back.
Well, you say it doesn't, so can you tell us why it doesn't?
Well, in fact, it doesn't work because, in part, people have to renew their thing every year to make it happen, and that's really hard on people who are disabled or people who are elderly, having to go back and reapply every year for the same amount of subsidy. There's been other problems associated with it in terms of how the word gets out to people. I mean, how many users did you say you have in that program, Jackson?
7,000.
Supervisor Elias, we have almost 7,000 total.
7,000. And how many hookups do we have? How many users do we have?
265,000.
265,000. And 20% of the people in Pima County live in poverty. So, you know what I'm saying? Things don't quite jive there.
Well, some of that's apartment rental, and they may not be paying those costs
Well,
directly to the utility, the individual's renting.
okay, well, if you don't want to hear more about it, then
Well, no,
then that's fine.
what I'm
But I
saying
think
is
we ought to
there
ask
are
them to
circumstances.
analyze their own program and come up with some answers about making it better and making it work better for people.
I have no objection to that. It's just that the hookup piece is not the whole story.
I understand that.
Mr. Huckleberry, I think the other thing, you can respond to that, and then the facility, the new facilities, the lab.
Yes, and Madam Chair, the question on the new facilities, the build-out of the West Campus, where the university is going to lease a portion for 10 years, that was a building that was planned to be expanded and be that large originally, with a phase of us growing into it. The university approached us with regard to housing some of their water quality experts and laboratory staff at the same facility to provide the synergy with regard to research into water quality issues. We do the compliance, and that's why we built the lab. The lab is a compliance laboratory, and it is the only one that's certified in southern Arizona. So what we have done is provide the synergy with the university. We will pay the external cost, they'll pay the internal fitting up the facility, and ultimately turn the whole facility over to us within probably 10 years.
And so your, as I understand your response, this is actually, we were going to build it to that size to begin with, and so having the university there and actually making some payments to us and outfitting the labs is a cost savings to us, is that right?
It is
Over time.
Madam Chair, it is us using a facility that we're going to need anyway, and then getting the benefit of having associated research done by the university at no cost to us.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor
I'd
Miller.
like to follow up on that point. You said it was the only certified lab in southern Arizona. What did we use prior to this?
The public labs, the public, it's only certified public lab. Prior to that, we had our own laboratory, and we did the test that we had the capability of doing, and then one of the balance of the work was sent to Phoenix or private contractors.
So overall, are we saving monies? Can we get an analysis of the previous labs, what it cost us, and then a breakdown of what it's costing us for debt plus the reduction in the operating costs that we're getting from the University of Arizona, so that we can look at that? Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, and Supervisor Miller, that will be one of the issues. Again, we're going to take whatever you have said and the questions you've raised and provide answers to all of it.
Yeah, Madam Chair. The other thing I'd comment on is that the last time we did sewer rate increases, we had another discussion about a low-income program, and we asked staff to come back with changes. Do you guys remember that? Jackson, you were there, as well as you, John. And I think, if I remember correctly, you worked with Mr. Atha over there in community development in trying to develop a new program, and we didn't, because we said there wasn't any viable way to change it and improve it. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Elias, yes, I do recall. I don't recall that we said there was no viable way to change it.
There was some pretty small changes we made, but it really didn't increase anything. And if you would, as you do this analysis, I think it'd be important to take a look at what those changes brought us, to see if in fact we have the robust program that Mr. Jenkins describes.
Thank you, Supervisor Elias. Mr. Huckleberry, it sounds like we're going to continue this item. I could be wrong. I very often am. But will you have this information ready by next week, or how, in terms of the continuance?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would suggest that you continue to either the first or second meeting in April, so that we can give a comprehensive response to each of the issues raised by the board.
That's true, but let's let our public member speak, and then we'll go ahead and take action.
Okay, no, I was just about ready to go then, if we're all done questioning Mr. Huckleberry and staff. And Mr. Cohen.
My name is Christopher Cole. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. Big surprise there, right? I'm first vice chair of the Pima County Libertarian Party, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Libertarian Party. In his book, Time Enough for Love, Robert Heinlein has the main character, Lazarus Long, born Woodrow Wilson Smith, speak a bunch of short, little pithy words of wisdom sayings. They were later collected and published separately as the Notebooks of Lazarus Long. One of those, my favorite, is be wary of strong drink, for it may make you shoot at tax collectors and miss. Pima County has a very high property tax rate. It's in the top 5th of all of the counties or county equivalents in America. There are rich counties that have a wider variety of taxes, but still have a lower tax rate as a percentage of the residents' income than Pima County. And now you're talking about raising the sewer fees, what, 2-3 times the rate of inflation? Yes, I understand, you're trying to catch up from years of neglect. Well, when you send out the property tax bill, when you send out the sewer fee bill, and various and sundry other fees that have been going up from Pima County, I suggest you include a healthy dose of whiskey or vodka or rum or tequila or moonshine or whatever. I'm not going to say that there's going to be an armed tax revolt, but I think there is a tax revolt on the horizon. You are putting too much of a burden on the residents. And yes, I agree, you're trying to catch up. But Pima County has not recovered from the downturn in the economy. Pima County can't afford it. At least not in conjunction with everything else that the Pima County government is doing to the taxpayers. Not for the taxpayers, to the taxpayers. So it's good that you're going to continue this. It's good that more studies are going to be done, because as the Board of Supervisors, you have a primary responsibility to manage the money that you take from the taxpayers efficiently. It doesn't sound like you're doing it.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to continue this item until April 14th.
So moved, and if I may also add that we also consult with at least a few social service agencies, including the Pima Council on Aging, to kind of address some of the issues that we're talking about for our low-income residents.
I'll second.
Motion and a second for continuation. Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries.